Let me tell you a little bit about Ruth Fine, then we'll get to the program. Ruth Fine has been known to the National Gallery, has worked here beginning in 1972, and after decades of various responsibilities here, both as curator of the Rosenwald collection, curator of prints and drawings, and then afterwards as curator of exhibitions, of monographic exhibitions, she then turned her attention to other responsibilities, including working on the art of Norman Lewis for now some almost decade. She launched here a talk some years ago about Norman Lewis, and we were very pleased, too, that the National Gallery acquired a very important work by the artist. What kind of things has Ruth worked on that gives her the big view for Norman Lewis? She has engaged with research on Jasper Johns' personal archive of proofs for his prints. She was responsible for a catalog resume of Roy Lichtenstein's prints. She was coordinator of the 1999 Georgia O'Keeffe catalog resume. She coordinated the Dorothy and Herbert Vogel collection 50 Works for 50 States projects. She has done exhibitions on the following American artists: Romare Bearden, Helen Frankenthaler, Jasper Johns I mentioned, Roy Lichtenstein I mentioned, John Marin, Georgia O'Keeffe I mentioned. But she has also provided to the public over these decades contemporary print publishing workshops, exhibitions, Crown Point Press, Gemini GEL, and Graphic Studio. When it comes to contributions to catalogs, important essays on Mel Bachner, Diebenkorn, Rauschenberg, Rosenquist, Whistler, and there's still more. By this time, she must be 1,000 from the number of things that she has done. She is based now in Philadelphia and sits on the board of the Terra Foundation for American Art, the Richard Diebenkorn Foundation, and the Roy Lichtenstein Foundation. She is not only has worked on an exhibition that is now opened in Chicago on Martin Puryear, and also now with the Pennsylvania Academy of the Arts. I want to welcome in just a moment Ruth to the podium, but I would just like to say another word about David C. Driscoll, a friend of the gallery, and I like now that we can say that he has been here in various capacities. When his book about him was written by Julie McGee, he agreed to be part of that conversation, and he has been here also talking about himself as a collector as well as an artist. He holds a Master of Fine Arts degree from Catholic University and 9 honorary doctoral degrees. Do we have a hand for Dr. Driscoll?
If you live long enough, you do a lot of things. Ms. Faya has just enumerated. I'm thrilled to see so many old friends here, including, believe it or not, a former student of mine who I haven't seen for 42 years, with whom I just had a lunch, and it was as if we hadn't not seen each other for 15 minutes. It was extraordinary. The film you were watching when you walked in, and I hope you were able to listen to it, it was 7 minutes from a 35-minute film that was made by somebody named Gary Shoshett, whom I don't know, but the film was given to me by a woman named Susan Stedman, who was a friend of Norman Lewis's. And the film was made at the time of his 1976 retrospective exhibition, his One Lifetime retrospective at the City University of New York. And it's in its entirety, it's quite marvelous. It has a lengthy group of discussions by students saying what a wonderful teacher he was, and it has a wonderful statement by Romare Bearden about what an important artist he is. But I needed to edit it down for the exhibition in Philadelphia, and they said you can only have 5 minutes, and I figured in 5 minutes it should only be Norman talking, and The subjects are art and race and politics, if you listen closely, and I think it's phenomenal, and I pushed them to 7 minutes and got away with it. The photograph on the left is Lewis, probably in 1945. On the right, it's Lewis in the 1970s, probably, or the late 1960s, because he's in his loft studio in downtown New York on Grand Avenue. In the middle is a self-portrait that, as far as I know, has never been viewed, been reproduced or exhibited before now. I found it in the studio, and it's 1949, painting on paper, probably oil with other materials. And it is emblematic for me of Lewis's extraordinary interest in the process of making works of art, which has been what brought me to him many years ago. I'm not going to tell you what you're looking at because everything is identified on screen. Lewis was born in Harlem in 1909. He died also in Harlem, although he was living at the time downtown in 1979. He spent most of his life in New York, in Harlem until 1967, 68. He purchased the Grand Street loft and moved downtown. He talks in an interview he did with Henri Ghent in the 60s about, and in other interviews as well, about seeing a woman painting on the street when he was about 9 or 10 years old, and that was what inspired him to want to be an artist. And so far as I can tell, he really never wavered from that dream, from that goal, and he didn't have an easy time of it. He discovered Augusta Savage when he was in his early 20s, and he is listed in much of the press from that period as being a student of hers, and I'm sure he was, although he always said that he was entirely self-taught, and he speaks of Savage as someone he liked to argue with, rather than someone he felt he learned from. He was active throughout his life in all of the Harlem community art activities. You can see him with his fellow colleagues in the image on the right. He went to the Harlem schools. He taught in the Harlem Art Center, participated in the WPA programs, and always was an active member of the community, the uptown community. He was also an active member of the downtown community. Among his best friends in that downtown community was Ad Reinhardt, whom he apparently met probably in the 30s when they were both involved with union activities, left-wing politics, but they stayed friends throughout their lives. In fact, it was Norman Lewis who introduced Ad Reinhardt to his wife, Rita Reinhardt, now Rita Reinhardt Bedford, who was one of Lewis's students at the Jefferson School in the late 1940s. All of the works that I'm showing you when I get to the works, including that first self-portrait, are in the Academy exhibition, just so you know that. I won't mention that again. Lewis taught at the Jefferson School in the late 40s. It was never quite clear whether he was fired, was asked to leave, left of his own volition. And with all of the reading we've done about Lewis to organize this exhibition and catalog, the answer to almost all of the questions is I'm not sure, I don't know, or it's not clear how something happened. I've never worked on an artist where it was so difficult to get anything that seemed like a fact. When we started the exhibition, I put together a chronology of every chronology that had been published, and it was 12 pages double-spaced. And I read it, and I thought, oh my God, there's nothing here. He went to Columbia. We don't know when, we don't know what he studied. He did this, he did that, no dates attached, including his origins. He is always said to have been born of Bermudian parents. I spent several days in Bermuda desperately looking for something that would give his origins in Bermuda, aside from the fact that the place that his parents sailed from to come to this country was Bermuda. His father always wrote that he was from I'm going to forget the name, not St. Croix, but St. something. Down to whether he's Bermudan or not, it's not clear. I'll come up with which saint it is that his father said he came from, and papers that were his document. And that's really been the story of this artist. When I've given tours of the exhibition, people sort of ask questions, and the answer is always, I don't know. And Faya showed you a really big, thick book. And my feeling about that big, thick book, which David wrote a wonderful preface, David Driscoll wrote a wonderful preface, there are several other essayists in it. We all worked very hard to get information, but I feel like all of us only scratched the surface. And that book is a kind of laying out of the territory, letting people know who Lewis is, what he did. There certainly is more in that book than has previously been published, but it is riddled with questions, and I was constantly fighting the editors who wanted to take out the question marks. And, I said, well, you can either take out the information or you take out the question mark, and I wasn't really willing to do either. When you get old enough, it's okay to say you don't know, and so that's filled with I don't knows, and I hope some younger people will come along and answer what some of the I don't knows are. In saying that he was self-taught, what Lewis basically also said was that he learned by reading and looking at art. And it's my sense that he probably looked at every exhibition in New York that he could get to, and every art book that was published that he could get his hands on. He made money in many different ways. He taught, but he also was a taxi driver. He painted, he was an elevator operator, and he talked frequently about being a gambler and talked about needing to gamble in order to get art books. And he has a wonderful library, which was clearly very important to him. These are two of about 8 known drawings, pastel drawings from 1935 that he did at the Museum of Modern Art during this exhibition that you see a photograph of in the middle. They're extraordinary pastel drawings, and I think one thing they show is the degree of Lewis's native talent. Whether he learned it by looking at art or he learned it by studying with Augusta Savage or anybody else, he certainly knew what he was doing, and he could do it in a very beautiful, careful, and thoughtful way. Less known than those drawings is the painting at the left, which has been published as a 1946 painting, but it's clearly dated in 1936. And it appeared in an exhibition of his during his lifetime, that 1976 retrospective. It appeared in that dated 1936, so I have no doubt about the date. And in 1936, the painting on the right by Kandinsky was hanging at the Museum of Modern Art in an exhibition of abstraction. It's clearly not a copy, but when you look at them both carefully, you see absolute resonance of forms in Lewis's work from the Kandinsky. And I think it's clear that in 1936 he was doing exactly what he had done in 1935. He'd gone to the Museum of Modern Art and worked, copied. He had permission to work in the galleries during those years. I'm not going to talk too much about the exhibition. It's divided in 6 sections. And the first of them are in the city, looking at art. The next one, and this is another in the city looking at art, pairing. One of the artists he admired a great deal was Vincent van Gogh. And he showed his admiration for Van Gogh in his titles and his subjects, and also over the years by signing his works Norman, in the same way that Vincent signed his works Vincent. So he was an artist that he admired a great deal. Actually, this is the one painting I'm showing you that's not in the exhibition, the shoes. I did see it. It's very beautiful, but with all exhibitions, you have to limit how much you can show. The next section of the exhibition is in the city looking at life. The painting in the middle has always been published as being on exhibition at the Met, which seemed odd that someone who's hardly known was exhibiting at the Met in 1933 or 34. And it turns out that the exhibition was in the Met Education Department in a show of community works. So indeed it was at the Met, but it wasn't in their galleries. The drawing at the left I don't think of as being a study for but clearly related to, and its size is important. It's 36 inches tall, which is a rather heroic size for a drawing at that time, I think. And on the right is a print of the same subject. Lewis worked in painting and drawing and in printmaking throughout his life. The painting and drawing focus was continual. The printmaking focus went in stages. He is called still a social realist, but he never seemed to me to be a social realist any more than he ever seemed to me to be an abstract expressionist, which is the other thing that he's called. Because I think from the very start of his career, he was interested in abstraction, impacted by his knowledge of Cubism and other abstract ideas that were in the air, and never was attempting the kind of realism that one associates with the label social realist. Just the kind of schematic dealing with folds in the clothing, for example. Somebody looked at this painting, which was unknown, and questioned whether it was him. And one of the things that's interesting to me is the way the 33 is in quotes, and just the way the 33 is in quotes here. And there's no question in my mind that it's a work by Lewis. Everything about the signature is right. But there are fake Lewises out there as well. The painting on the left is the painting that during Lewis's lifetime was the most exhibited representational painting, so that in any shows where he was asked to include early work, I think you can see in the Girl with the Yellow Hat, which is, as I said, the painting that was most exhibited. It's the best-known painting. It's now in a private collection and hasn't been exhibited for many years, but one of them in public. But one of the, and we had a fight for it. We got most of what we wanted in the show, but this was one of the ones we really had to ask for again and again to get permission to have. And fascinatingly, it's in the same collection as the painting that I'm relating to Kandinsky. So it's two wonderful paintings in the same place. Kandinsky and Gorky are the two people that I think Lewis was paying attention to at this time. And as he moved from the kind of voluminous, volumetric forms of Cubism and Mexican mural painting, which is something else he was looking at, and I think the evidence of that is in The Woman with the Yellow Hat, he also was breaking out of and moving towards a style in which line and field work together in tandem. His work is always, for me, a combination of drawing and painting, breaking down whatever barriers there were between those two media at that time. Line plays an important role in all of the paintings, and field plays an important role in many of the works on paper. Lewis has been described by everybody who knew him as a very dapper dresser, interested in style. And one of the things he did as a young man was he worked for a tailor. And the tailor was very encouraging to him in exploring his art. But throughout the rest of his life, he made clothes for himself and his friends. There's a needlework in the show, which I'll show you momentarily. And so he was aware of style, and I think that's very clear in the Hepcats painting at the right. The details of patterning, the way he's not concerned with the leg as leg, but leg as shadow, and breaking up the forms in a way that's not about social realism at all. The window pane pattern here, the handkerchief, the different hats, everybody a different hat, the woman with her wonderful detailed eyes, jewelry. Very, very concerned with detail, but also the fields are composed of multiple layers of color that work together to create new forms that are what he's looking at on the canvas rather than forms that he's necessarily viewing in the world. People ask, why haven't we heard about Lewis? And I think there are several reasons why we haven't heard about Lewis. I think one, obviously, is that there was racism in the world. And as an African-American artist, even one who was getting visibility downtown, that worked against him. He also never arrived at a signature style. And in the evolution of his art, multiple things are happening simultaneously. This particular work, it's a recto verso. The police beating is 1943. I don't know anything else quite like that in his work, but when I think of the hideous images we've seen in recent years on television and films, it's kind of shocking to see how potent this 1943 image, presumably done in New York or based in an experience in New York, is for us today. The rural landscape, my guess is it was done in the South in 1938. Astonishingly enough, the WPA sent Lewis to the Carolinas to set up workshops. He didn't stay long. He didn't find it a welcoming community, and I don't know why anybody would have been surprised about that. But this object with this recto verso of such different moods seems to me in some ways to be emblematic of what Lewis's career was in a variety of ways throughout his life. There's an element of caricature that happens in many of his figures that can be seen here. I actually want to go back. I want to go back to this. It's not as evident here, but there are many compositions where he has multiple figures, and they all always have different face colors, different skin colors. He was very conscious in all of his figurative works of the range of how people looked. No two would ever be alike, and these look more alike than they actually are, but I think you can see that they are different. Less so here, where he does seem to be not exactly caricaturing, but the white men are the white men beating the black man. And so his concern is, I think, very much here with the event rather than with aesthetics. We found a number of objects while we were working on this show. This head with scarification that he would have seen in African sculpture, which he carried into a drawing, and I see these are two other things that are not in the show, so I was not giving you full right information when I said everything is in the show, but the drawing and the painting are dated 1944, and we're assuming that the head was dated 1944 as well. Much of Lewis's work is not dated. Many titles have been lost, and all the work, I mean, this is a painting that we found a title for through a reproduction of this image in a art journal of the 40s. Up until then, it was been called The People, or The Four Figures, or Our People, Our Kind of People. And so in the course of our work, we did retitle some paintings, but many of the paintings are called Title Unknown. And we use Title Unknown instead of Untitled because any place where I saw records of Lewis's work, they had titles. And we were able to correct and add titles. And if somebody ever had the time to kind of go through all the works for which we don't know titles and the list of titles that exist from his lifetime, I think there would be possibilities of making a match. Again, that's something for one of the young people. But the relationship between the drawings or the works on paper and the paintings is similar in the way that the relationship is here, and we don't find objects throughout his life. I'm guessing that all of these objects, and I'm going to show you one more in a moment, were done in the 40s. And by the late 40s, when he was essentially focusing on abstraction in new ways, I don't think any of the objects come from that period. I mentioned before that he did needlework, and this is one of his needleworks. It's actually on a pillowcase, and whether it was ever used or not, I don't know. He did Bargello, and I was told by anybody who knew him that this doll-like form, which we initially called puppets, but they're not puppets. They have no mechanism that would allow them to function as puppets. That it was a self-portrait, and I've seen many photographs of him with the boater. He's very often wearing a striped shirt, and the herringbone pants that he's wearing as well apparently were a kind of pants that he wore. But as I said, we have no idea when these were made or why they were made. And we're able to talk to many people who did know Lewis personally, and none of them had any sense at all. But they're incredibly skillfully done. His sense of touch, and no matter what he did, was just brilliant in his clarity. Quite amazing, I think. The next section, I said we did in the city, looking at art in the city, looking at life. And the third portion of the first section of the show is in the city 1945, which was a transitional year. He really moved into abstraction. The work on paper on the left is 1944, as you can see, but clear relationships, and you can see the further breakdown from the Hepcats painting of the lack of confinement of the forms. These are fields of color as much as they are faces or figures. The patterning stays. This notion of potato eaters, anything parentheses is somebody's name and is somebody's title other than the artist's. And I think that was really given at some previous time by someone who was reading into Lewis's connection with Van Gogh. I think that mattered to him a lot. This is a multi-layered painting. Some of Lewis's paintings are very, very lightly painted, delicately painted. You see the canvas texture through them. This is a heavily painted work. And it's my sense that almost all of the heavily painted works, if you went and looked and were able to deal with them with the kind of X-ray conservation studies that are possible here at the National Gallery, you would see multiple layers of painting. I think he either painted directly or he took old canvases and repainted it and reworked them, but no way to prove that. Painting on the left, Composition 1, is, I think, probably what he considered his first abstract painting. In the photograph of him below, one that was reproduced many, many times throughout his life and subsequently, but I think the fact that it happened so much throughout his life indicates that he was proud of this painting. It was a landmark painting for him. And one of the things that you can't really see is there are all kinds of textural things happening in here. I don't know if you know Sam Gilliam's paintings that are raked. Well, throughout much of Lewis's work, there are areas that are not raked but are like combed. They have that kind of parallel line texture. And the problem, of course, and why I hope you'll all get to see the show because the works are so beautiful, is that you can't get any sense of that beauty by looking in slide form. And the other works are up here just to show the kinds of, he used Harlem as his source of imagery throughout his life, if he was using architecture, which is one of the threads. And he did it in every form, the drawings, the watercolors, and the watercolor is dated the same year as that painting. And I think we're looking at fire escapes and windows and all kinds of architectural elements in these. I mean, that's my title. This title is taken from this. But I think, again, you can see that he's fighting with abstraction and figuration. This is 49. I'm going to show you some things that are earlier than that. The two on the right here. This is a period where he is really deeply involved with abstraction, and these are all from a section of the show called Visual Sound. These drawings are extraordinary ink drawings where he lays down an ink line and then pulls the ink. Difficult to tell what kind of tool he's using. When I first saw it, it looked like he was using a matchstick. Then it looked like a popsicle stick. It doesn't look like a brush. His studio tools were not available to me. I don't think they still live. And he's viewed as being interested in jazz. And part of the reason that this is here is because of its title. His brother was a violinist. Lewis played the piano throughout his life. He was always tied to music, but it wasn't only jazz music, it was classical music as well. And in his archives from the 70s, you see lots of concert programs, all kind of music. And, the 70s when he was teaching and could afford to go to concerts. There are very few teaching full-time, or teaching substantially at the Art Students League. Again, this kind of jewel-like tension, a kind of syncopation, the notion of sound. There's a painting in the show, I don't have an image to show you, called Roller Coaster, and it's about the movement of a roller coaster, but it's also about the sound that a roller coaster made. But in relation to jazz, these are three paintings from the same year. They're the same size, basically. In fact, I think that's not right. This is a larger painting. But you can see that notion of theme and variation. The musicians themselves are more specific here. This is broken up more, this is broken up even more. And obviously Picasso was somebody he was looking at a great deal as well. The next section of the show is called Rhythm of Nature. And again, a way to think of the photograph I'm assuming is his. There are lots of snapshots in his files that are his. The Winter Branches painting, this is a kind of notation, almost like a musical notation. And this is a much more spare drawing where you may be able to see more clearly this thing I was talking about before, about the ink being pulled. And again, Winter Branches 46, Winter Branches 54. It's not unusual for an artist to keep pursuing theme, but it's just interesting to see that that was what he did, and the way this kind of tension between representation and abstraction stayed in the work. Okay, from 1946 to 1964, Lewis showed in the Willard Gallery. It was one of the most prestigious galleries in New York at the time. One of his best friends in the gallery was Genichiro Inokuma, with whom he went fishing. This is a woman who was his partner from about 1945, 46 to 53, 54 in the Willard family here. He would spend a lot of time at Locust Valley with them, and that was where I think the kind of immersion in nature took place in his visual arena. So the title of the show is Procession, and these are all processions. The section of the show that these are in is called Ritual, and the one in the upper left from 1947 is the earliest one I know. There may be earlier paintings on this theme, but I haven't seen one. And there are notations throughout of little figures that Lewis did refer to as little people. They're more specifically stick figures here. And these figures remain. I will, at the end of the talk, show you some things from 1978 that have as strong a figurative motif as these paintings do. And this Migrating Birds from 1953 won the Carnegie International Prize for the most popular painting in 1955. The Carnegie International is still one of the most important international exhibitions. It certainly was in 55. And at that time, everybody who came to the show was given a ballot and asked to vote for their favorite painting. And Lewis won over prestigious people such as Pollock or Rothko. I forget exactly who was in that show. That he was getting, during his lifetime, with the Willard Gallery, and his paintings were, as it turned out, we dug up 130 group exhibitions he was in during his lifetime. That's fairly substantial, and the catalog is now outdated because we've learned of 2 more since it was published. Before that, there was a very modest exhibition history for him. So one of the questions is what happened? Why did this artist who was so admired stop being known? Well, the next ones that are going to come up are going to be an emphasis on the calligraphic aspects of the work. You'll see a painting on the left that is essentially a white oil painting that has a graphite drawing throughout it, kind of intermixture. Again, this is a painting it's a long vertical. The format is one that I take to be the inspiration of Japanese and Chinese scrolls, the long, narrow vertical, and there also is the wide horizontal, which he was clearly very interested in. We have a selection in the exhibition of works from his library, which includes a book on Chinese calligraphy, but we also have a wonderful selection of articles that he cut from art journals and had in his files, and they include articles on Gorky and articles on science. The point really was a range of calligraphy. The long vertical format is a very broad brushstroke with implications of figures. So this is a kind of calligraphic methodology that he used in the 60s, very different in many ways from this carefully drawn linear calligraphy that's in this oil painting here in a detail here, which I hope you can see it. So he's always investigating how the materials can be used. And for the years that I've been interested in Lewis, people were asking me, well, he's all over the place. And I said, no, he's not all over the place. He's always investigating the materials. And I think people would say he was all over the place because he never arrived at a signature image like Rothko arrived at or de Kooning arrived at. Not that they didn't evolve, they evolved, but at any given time, there was what one might think of as a signature image. And for me, I think Lewis was just so much more complicated because his life was so much more complicated. He was conscious of everything that was happening downtown and conscious of everything that was happening uptown. And I think he felt committed to evaluating and weighing and including it. And I think the density of the work really grows from how much he knew and experienced. It was more than most of us know and experience. In 1957, he did his one trip to Europe. He went there for several months, basically Italy, Spain, some France, North Africa. And he came back with a new thread to his ritual, and that was the carnival. And the painting at the lower left is one of the first carnival based on his European experience. And several years later, he does another one that's related to it in its palette, in some aspect of its composition. And this was a common thing for him to do, that he would do something and almost chew on it for a few years and then go back to it. And there would only be the two of them. It wouldn't be something that happened all the time. I showed you a print at the very beginning. He did prints during the 30s and 40s. We found no prints during the 50s. I think we have 38 prints documented in the print checklist in the catalog, and that too is now outdated because 2 months ago one came up at auction that I hadn't seen before. But the early prints are all lithographs except for his very first print, which was an etching. And then starting in the 60s, I think around 66, William Majors, an artist that he met through the group Spiral that was founded in 63, taught many of the Spiral artists, or encouraged many of the Spiral artists to do etching. And so you can see that the subjects of the prints, they're monochromatic at this period, basically brown and black inks, usually not in combination. So the section after ritual is called Civil Rights. Lewis always said that he stopped painting representationally because when you painted representationally, socially realist work, that you were basically preaching to the crowd, that it didn't help anything, that being part of demonstrations is how you dealt with the political arena of your time. But clearly, I don't think anybody can view a painting such as this as an apolitical painting. It's clearly a Klan painting, and the drawing to the right is clearly a Klan work on paper. And it's a fascinating story about that. This work is owned by the daughter of a close friend of Lewis's, and she did, as a fourth grade student, she did a biography of Lewis. And he was so grateful to her for doing this biography for her fourth grade class, and this biography is in the show. It's priceless. As a thank you for doing this biography, he gave her parents 2 drawings to give to her when she got older. One when she was 13 and one when she was 18. And the one when she was 13 is a kind of joyous procession in yellow. And this is the one when she was 18. And he told the parents, don't give her that until she's old enough to understand its mood. And so what a conscious decision about the development of a young woman. And there are a group of black and white paintings from that period. And there's also this catalog that I am sure was not titled March on Washington by Lewis. His titles are never that specific. They always allow for multiple interpretations. So that's either it's a dealer's title. The person who owned it got it with that title. But they're colorful. There are a number of colorful works during that time. But the one painting we couldn't get in the show is this painting on the right that he's standing in front of, which was on view in the Single Spiral exhibition in 1965 called Processional. And that was in Lewis's family until a few years ago when his wife's mother died and it was sold, and whoever owns it now didn't want to be known. And so I couldn't get that. That's the heartbreaker. But there's a drawing on the left that I think is very close, and as a drawings person. I'm actually quite happy to have drawings represent ideas if I can't get paintings, and the spiral catalog is what you have at the bottom. But what's remarkable to me about Lewis is that also in the 50s, when he was moving into paintings that were based on civil rights themes, and this drawing, which says circa 1960, I think have since discovered is actually 1961. So it's basically the same time as that Klan painting. So you're doing a painting like this in 1960 and a romantic drawing like this around 1961. And I had an amazing revelation about that drawing. I've been near the water in the last few weeks, and Lewis loved being near the water, and I was looking at all of these diagonal reflections of light on the water, and I'm fairly convinced, I went back and looked at the drawing yesterday, 2 days ago, that this is a drawing that the forms derive from the kinds of forms he saw on water, which is really quite related to John Marin, another artist who loved being near the water that I've spent time looking at. So I figure if I ever write another essay, it's going to be on Lewis and Marin. Okay, in 1968, Lewis moved downtown. He got a larger studio than he'd ever had, and he did the largest works of his life. He did, I know of 9, so perhaps there are 10 or 11 paintings, all of which measure approximately 72 by 87 inches. They're either horizontal or vertical in format. They're done between 69 and 72, with one of them continued reworked in 76. And they go from this pastoral afternoon that relates to the calligraphic masquerade I showed you before to such confrontational or triumphal, I think clearly Klan-related rally scenes as these two. And there's a wonderful essay by the art historian Jeffrey Stewart in the catalog, which really does describe Triumphal in great length as Lewis's masterpiece, and it's pretty extraordinary. On the left is another of these paintings, New World A Coming, and on the right are prints that he was doing in the 1970s, basically at Bob Blackburn's workshop, working with Muhammad Khalil. So we did, great color experimentations during that period. Most of them are not in editions. I think 1 or 2 of them is in an edition. And in 1973, he went with Ouida, who was to become his wife in 1974, to Greece to visit the painter Jack Whitten and his wife Mary. And he came back, and this other theme, sea change, was added to his repertoire, and most of the sea changes are blue or green. Some are on canvas, many more are on paper. So you see that there are works in red as well. But you also go back and see the similar circular theme from the 1930s, so that as you go through this body of work, you find ways to weave elements from much earlier period in a very direct way back into the development of the art. This is a painting owned by a Washingtonian who I believe is in the audience, named Darrell Atwell. Dr. Darrell Atwell, a very, very gorgeous oil and pastel on paper that, again, brings up that circular theme, and it seems to me to relate very closely to the sea change motif if you look at the painting on the top and then think of this drawing, that, something is forming in 1964 that got developed a decade later. But again, the surfaces of this drawing are extraordinary. And they're all cold oils on paper, but some of them, I think, have no oil at all. Many of them have oil combined with other media. Again, lots of people to do. And throughout all of this time, Lewis continued his social activism, his community efforts. He, with Romare Bearden and Ernest Critchlow, founded the Cinque Gallery in 1969. And you see him with Ernie Critchlow and Mary Schmidt Campbell at a symposium. And you see him with his wife, Ouida, a young woman in Bearden, and then protesting Harlem on My Mind. So he was always an activist. And his files are filled with articles cut from newspapers and magazines about race issues. They were never not on his mind. They're annotated. The ephemera that's in the exhibition is fantastic. There's a letter to Eleanor Roosevelt, who was there at the opening at the Harlem Community Arts Center, so he may well have met her there, writing to her, What can a young African-American artist, 1940, what can a young African-American artist do to help his country? There's a 1977 letter to Leo Castelli, one of the great dealers at that time, saying, I live right around the corner from your gallery. I'm really good. Why don't you come look at my work? No evidence that Leo Castelli ever went. But his sense of the importance of what he was doing never waned. Whatever problems he had, he kept working and was a great inspiration, from what I can tell, to the next generation of artists, especially African-American artists who wanted to work in abstraction, because he kind of broke ground for them. But at the same time, it's pretty difficult to look at these two drawings and call them abstract expressionists. They are processions, they are people on bicycles, walking. There are animals in them. So that these are 1978, the year before he died. And so to the very end, he was staying with the figure and also doing abstract works as well, and inspiring others. These are two portraits of him. And Herbert Wheeler, if you squint at that Herbert Wheeler, you can really see Lewis. And I think that it's done in 77 when the sea was a big part of Lewis's work. I think it's Wheeler doing a sea image that's Lewis's portrait. And the one on the right, I had the good fortune to talk to Chester Higgins, who sent me several photographs of Lewis. And this is the only one that's not a basically straightforward photograph. And, I called him and I said, well, what was that about? And he said, basically, it was his way of acknowledging Lewis's commitment to abstraction, that he wanted to do an abstract portrait. And so he was inspiring photographers as well as painters